But this book, when I wrote about your book for Denik N, I was immediately attacked by the website Ménej štátu SK less state.sk, that you are no economist and that it's too left-wing and you don't understand the great ideas of the three most important topics you're dealing with: deregulation, liberalization, and privatization of the private properties, of the state properties into the private hands. So how did you react to this as being a historian, writing mostly on economic issues? Were the reactions in the German-speaking countries similar, that it's some sort of a controversial topic, that you are trying to analyze such a complicated, complex development?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to all of you, and the nice receival here in Bratislava. And I'm also very glad that Pani Ministra Schmögner-Roba has returned and is well, compelling herself to listen to me again. Well, thank you for this invitation. I hope I can contribute something. Maybe first about the personal thing, because maybe it's important to understand how I got to write it. It was quite simple because of family relations, but to the Czech part of Czechoslovakia. Well, we kept up quite close relations, and so once a year we visited the relatives in Prague and vice versa. And anyway, then in May '89 I was in Prague, and then there was the big demonstration. This, like in January, there's a lot of people and police action. And well, then I applied for the next visa, and that was in November. And well, you all know what happened in November. So, and then basically, I lived and worked in Prague in '92 because of some connection to Czech exiles as well. Anyway, but already in the summer of 1990, I recall this kind of bad feeling that something was going wrong, and especially then in the fall and the consecutive elections. And I think the first kind of, well, not the shock therapy, but the kind of first shock or disappointment was that actually the original values of the revolution kind of petered out, and it got a different turn. And I always kept that in mind and was wondering, well, you know, why did it go a different way? I mean, revolution, of course, there's, if you look at, I'm a historian first of all, but if you look at, and not an eyewitness, but if you look at revolutions, history of revolutions, it's quite normal that, you know, they start with a certain goal and then they get a different turn.
The other story is that these guys are telling you the very same thing. They're basically perfect continuation of this late socialism story. And the late socialism story is sort of on Havel's dictum from the 70s is, you don't have to do anything. Keep your mouth shut. Listen to what, I mean, we are the politicians. You keep your mouth shut as an average citizen. We will deliver the consumer goods in a sizable portions. And unlike socialism, it's not going to be a usual Skoda car. It's going to be BMW. So you would be really foolish to mess with us.
Yes, good point. I mean, if I may respond first, may I? Is it okay? Yeah, well, about the alternatives and the consumerists' promise. The alternatives, yes, for a while people felt ashamed and hesitated to vote for the old guys, so to say, even if it was the young old guys like Kwasniewski, who looked splendid. But anyway, and Melvis Mechia, who is he? But that's a strange mixture of all. But anyway, yes, I would agree. Yes, there was a desire to have something new, and so there was some popular base of radical reforms. I would agree in the 1990s. Yes, this looked plausible, and I think it looked so plausible because the main promise was one of not just prosperity or navrat do Europy, but it was there was a promise of modernization. If you do those reforms now, the cuts now, then there will be a better, more prosperous future. And this is precisely the same argument like you had it in state socialism. You bring some sacrifices now, having deindustrialization, some pollution, yes, but in the future. And I think this is why there was the arguments in a subconscious way were convincing.
We are talking about neoliberal narrative, which we have. So I agree that we do not have a social democratic narrative. So maybe we have some policies, but the agenda is very, very limited. But now we see that the political competition is moving from this traditional pattern between left and right. And you mentioned it, that the campaigns are about migration, about European Union, about the so-called identity question. So it's not anymore about social and economic interests so much. And so now my question is, so how these two narratives fit into these new conditions of political competition? So do we face any reconfiguration of the dividing lines in the society? So it's not left and right anymore, definitely. And one comment, so I think that not the losers of transition emigrated from this country. So I think that so
they commute to Austria.
Some of them commute, but these 200,000 plus economic actively people are not the losers, and so I think it's a brain drain or labor force drain for the country. So not to say that this is the consequence of the neoliberal economic policy. So I think it would be it's not right. So it's a myth to say it in that way.
Thank you.
Maybe broader comment on what Olga was saying also before is that just two comments. One is that there's this left-right distinction, but for example, when we did research with my wife on anti-corruption policies in government manifestos in the Czech Republic and Slovakia, we found that there was a difference between left and right on the sort of government versus market kind of things a little bit. So the more market-driven solutions were much more likely to be espoused by centre-right governments, and the sort of control instruments more likely by the left-wing governments. But there was also a third where actually the difference was much bigger, and that was the participatory and the public control approach, which the centre-right in both countries favored much more than the centre-left. So actually there was a bigger distinction than between markets versus hierarchies, between sort of participation, public control versus government control. And so the centre-right, I would argue that the centre-right in this region, or at least in former Czechoslovakia, is distinct from centre-left also on this, what we were talking about, the civil society and importance of the public participation, and both rhetorically and in practice. And that is completely contradictory to the sort of traditional social democratic versus conservative politics, and it's still here. I mean, even when we looked at Fico versus Radičová government, or when we looked in Czech Republic on Nečas versus it's still here. The centre-right is still much more focused on public control and participation than the centre-left.
Somehow also connected with the problem, there is no more interests policy, or it's not so important anymore, and the identity policy is going to decide our future. That question was not on the agenda originally, but we still, most of us are in a state of shock after, however expected it might be, the Brexit. And what do you think will be the role of the semi-peripheric states like ours, and what would be the impact? Both. I don't.
Do we want to collect some more
Yeah,
questions?
sure. Anybody else?
There was one more question, please.
I guess about something else. So after the question.
Maybe shortly, if you could. Yeah.
Okay. Identity politics. Yes, they play with identities, but I think it is more than that, and there's a social issue behind it. At least if you look at the populist electorate in the West, that is very. Of course, it's also part of the elite, engaged in that, engineers, economists, economy professors in Germany, for example, quite high figure. But I think there's more to it. It's not just about identity. It has to do with social changes, and at least that more and more people are, even if they're not poor. Of course, they're not poor, but some. I think a part of the electorate, if you take Britain, for example, a strong anti-European electorate was the unemployed, the disempowered, the poor. This was the main brunt. Of course, then there was part of the elites and well, let's not forget the media. I mean, boulevard media, which are going down the drain, the tabloids, because in the internet world, what are they? So there was a last struggle, and they're constantly having to struggle with, the most blatant campaigns and lies. That's how they try to survive 10 or 20 years more. But anyway, either those, the lower parts of well, we can talk about transformation losers, but yes, your point was right. In a way, they are transformation losers. They are losers of economic reforms, or they are afraid of them. And there's a lack of perspective in this lower middle class. And I think this drives most people to those parties. And it's not just about identity. I think it's maybe here in this part of Europe might be more about national identity and against Brussels and. Brussels as the Union, the European Union as the reincarnation of the Soviet Union. I mean, Klaus again. But and I understand, for countries which have won the national sovereignty 25 or 27 years ago. Okay, it's more important than maybe for other countries. But I think the main thing behind it is not, identity. Then is it really cultural? What we're having now, the problem. In parts it might be, but I think the main thing is something else. I would say.
I would agree and maybe build up on that. First of all, I don't, what I'm gonna say is probably not true in Poland or Hungary, but I don't know many people in Czechoslovakia who believe in sovereignty. I mean, not normatively, but that they actually exist. Even the nationalists don't believe that we were sovereign at any point in time. So. And I think on the Czechs is similar. That just independence doesn't mean sovereignty. So I would say that it's there is. And that's one of the reasons why we for a long time didn't have and still have so many problems with the union, is that if you don't believe you have something to lose, then you don't worry so much about losing it. So I think that might be a little bit different here. But the motto of the Brexit campaign, I think, was brilliant, and I think it applies here as well. Which the motto, if you remember, was "Take back control."
Yeah.
And I think if someone could organize a referendum about something in this country which could have a motto "Take back control," and I think that referendum would be very successful. We just don't have, we just don't know what it would be about.
But basically, you could translate "Ludzie potrzebują istoty" in a way.
Yeah, but in a way, yes, and that's why Fico won. But because he's not delivering it, then But yeah, in a way, yes. So I'm trying to say is that it's this feeling of control that and. As I try to say, Slovaks are maybe a little bit sensitive about, because we for a long time haven't felt like we have control of our destiny, but still many people are very frustrated, and they would, I think, respond positively to that. And if you look at the Brits and the Central Europeans, I think you see two very different things, but with very similar outcomes, which is that in Slovakia, in Czech Republic, also in Hungary, we accepted things which would be unacceptable in Germany or France. I mean, they talk a lot about globalizations, but if they had 95% of their banking system owned by multinational banks, and if they had 80% of their manufacturing sectors owned by fully multinationals, then the Germans and the French would be very, very upset about. Even the supposedly relaxed Brits would be very, very upset about such a complete foreign control of their economy. But at the same time, if Bratislava was suddenly to have 150,000 foreigners living here, which is the same proportion as in London, or even 200,000 foreigners, this city would probably erupt. I mean, we don't have a tradition of handling such a such a simulation, and I don't think we could learn very fast. And you could see it in the refugee crisis how much even very small numbers could, you know, drive up the hysteria high. So in a way, the things we
look back to your pre-war history.
Yeah. So the things we cannot accept, at least politically, are the things the Brits could accept, and vice versa. But in the end, they're also about control. But one is more in the economy, one is more about the migration. But I think it's similar thing, but just in different channels.
Neoliberal economy, and as you told us, words I picked up, the belief, as somebody believed in communism or something else, the neoliberal economic policies, and with the belief having an essence of fundamentalism itself, and which one implemented without any gross discussion in the society as given as a part of the reformation of this country, this part of the world. And ultimately, you don't think that almost 400,000 Slovaks who ultimately lost, the losers, or you can consider they left the country, the steam went away, they were ejected to the European labor market. So it ultimately shows us that it was a failure, at least partial, because they are coming back. The Czech Republic, 100,000 Slovaks, UK have 100,000 Slovaks, and other countries, if you count, in total having 100,000 Slovaks. Out of 5 million people, 300 to 500,000 people, which is a gross number, and it is a failure itself. And you cannot tell that the emigration from Slovakia is a voluntary. Slovaks are far more located where they want to live. They even don't try to travel to another town for a job. So this is a trauma, and the trauma is coming on through the populism and by all anti-European, anti-globalization, anti-immigration even rhetoric, which one is getting a base here. Because a country where only 15 people applied for asylum have probably 6-10 members of parliament of the neo-fascists. So it is a situation. So is it a failure of neoliberal economy?
Well, I think no. I think it's a failure of, well, first of all, as we just said, the transition path of Slovakia, comparatively speaking and historically speaking, I think cannot be termed a failure. You know, you can criticize it on many things, but if you said it's a failure, then show me the success of a comparable country, you know, Slovakia. So, I mean, so first of all, that's one point on the big part. But overall, I think if you look at, I mean, if you talk to people who are now abroad, and I think that's the real political change now, is how to change that, then the reasons are less and less related to wages and less related to the sort of direct economic factors, and more related to quality of life issues ranging from corruption, but also the quality of the public services and the overall public atmosphere. So I think, I mean, while, you know, some people, you know, depending on who you dislike, I mean, I don't mean you personally, but whom you dislike as a citizen, you can blame that on communism, long-term history, matriarch, neoliberalism, who you want. I mean, you can find a plausible tale for everyone to be responsible for this thing. But I personally think that, and that brings me where I started, that if you want to have a certain type of state and certain type of state capacity, you need to build that. We don't. I mean, I fully agree with the professor that there was this long-time assumption that because the communist state was sort of too big, that the way to get to normal state is just to cut it down. And now I think nearly everyone except for this Mene Štatu SK knows that that was not the true story, that you need a little bit maybe to cut down, but you much more need to restructure, to build up things that didn't exist before and cut things that maybe existed before, or even just reform. And I think so. I would say if there is some fault of what you would call neoliberalism, I think it's that it participated in this, that it didn't think carefully enough at the time about this thing. Because I think there are now very few people, at least in this country, who would still think that the problem was just cutting down. And I think there is now a vast majority who realize that, you know, if you don't do the other part, then the cutting down basically doesn't bring you much.
Yes, it's a good point about the migration. Well, you know, there's a certain logic in the system. If you argue for foreign direct investments, which means the freedom of capital, okay, then why, you know, not permit the freedom of movement of of people, of migration. So I think overall it is the freedom to migrate somewhere else and to look for a job somewhere else and to take up these opportunities. I think in principle it's positive, right? Because it added a dimension of freedom to the lives of many people. And of course, when you put up your question, you're completely right. It's not just the people emigrating from the very poor regions, actually those often cannot afford to migrate. For example, parts of the Roma population and so on, you can pay for the bus. But it's more, yes, it's a very mixed thing, part of the elites, young, studied, no job. But anyway, all in all, I would say it's a positive achievement of '89. The wall came down, the Iron Curtain, well, it was permitted before, but anyway, it came down, and you go here and there where you want. It's positive. But if it has these kind of dimension and results, trauma, I'm not sure for everybody, but yes, for children where one parent is always abroad, away, or maybe two, and they grow up with the grandparents, yes, I would agree. This is a grave problem, and I sometimes wonder why it is not more widely discussed, also in the sense what could be done about it. I mean, why not try it, and how? Of course, that requires a lot of thinking and easy solutions. I mean, thank God I'm not a political scientist who is advising politicians with easy solutions, but anyway, it's very difficult to come up with a solution, but I think one should think about it, yes, how one could bring back at least parts of those migrants, to reinforce the country, to rejuvenate it, to have a counter, to have a power against the rising populism and authoritarianism, because after all they got to know something else. So something should be done about it, and it might even be a more sincere economic growth strategy than I don't know, the next cutback in taxes or whatever you have in mind. And here just one remark, and with that I conclude, how important human capital is also for the economic performance. When the crisis struck, Poland was the only country not to have a recession. Well, of course, part of it can be explained with government policy, that it didn't cut back the spending and took in allowed a bigger deficit. The other one is actually 300,000 people came back from England and Ireland, predominantly, and then came home with their savings, invested. And if you just count the 300,000 against the population of 38 million officially, of course you just have, even that brings almost 1% of increase. And if they then invest, of course you have an economic dynamism from that. So I would agree that it is a very important issue, and it also, I think, is an issue where one can look at those reforms not from this, abstract position, where it's like a medical doctor who then gives out a therapy. I mean, what is a therapy? If you just think about the words, even more so the shock. And if migration, I think, forces us to think about reforms from a more popular daily life basis, and that's why I think it is important to think about it. But as a historian, we usually rather put up questions than we have ready-made recipes.
Okay.